Welcome to the third Scholastic Parent Briefing. These are very snappy, short sessions where we consider a topic of importance to parents. The format is we have about 20 minutes of discussion up here, and then after that we open it up to questions. So do start thinking about questions as we start talking. Today we're really talking about where you're coming from and what that means in terms of applying for a school. And so I'm going to start by asking the panel to talk a little bit about that rather than me just do an introduction. So I'm going to start by asking Elaine Cunningham-Walker if she'd like to tell us a little bit about herself and her experiences of applying to independent day and boarding schools.
Gosh, a little bit about myself. So I'm Elaine Cunningham-Walker. I'm an educational strategist. And I have a firm agenda to make sure that more children who look like me and also from underrepresented communities have places in day schools and boarding schools. And my children have won lots of places, and they're quite happy in quite a number of schools that are featured here today. I think that's enough about me. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, but hey.
And David, maybe let's start with obviously what your job is and then your background. There's a brilliant story you have about walking past where you currently work when you were a boy.
Yeah. Thanks very much, guys. So I'm David Goodhew. I'm the head at Latymer Upper School, which is in Hammersmith in West London. And funnily enough, that's where I grew up. So I'm a local boy. I grew up in the tower block opposite Grenfell, actually, and I was the first member of my working class family to do A-levels or go to university. I ended up in independent schools by accident, because when I graduated there were no teaching jobs in my subject in the state sector, so that's how I ended up working in independent schools. And since I started at Latymer in 2012, I've been on a real mission to widen access to the school, again, a bit like you, to people from my background, i.e. From poor backgrounds locally. And the great news is that thanks to our Inspiring Minds campaign, we're now in a situation where 1 in 5 students in the school is there on a means-tested bursary, and soon that will be 1 in 4.
And David had a great story that when you walked past the school as a child, you thought it was a church? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I had no idea what it was, thought it looked like a church. I had heard of the school, but I didn't think it was for people like me, and I had no idea how to apply, and I had no idea that I could have gone there for free.
So the first question I've got is for you, David. Do governors set targets for diversity?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the governors are keen to ensure that the school is diverse and inclusive and reflects our local community. So, for example, we're fully co-educational, 50% boys, 50% girls. Most people who come to the school from within a 3-mile radius. And, you know, the population of West London is very cosmopolitan. People from all socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. And we don't have quotas, but we do like to think that if we're running our admissions properly, then actually we should end up being representative of our local communities.
And Elaine, then, on a related question, what from the parent side, what is the attraction of independent schools?
Well, I think the attraction, and I always talk about this, is the networks that your child obviously gets. And you have a smaller class size. I think that's a really big factor that they want their children to be focused on more, where they might not get the attention that they need to have in a state school. And as much as a state school might be outstanding, you cannot compare an outstanding state school to an independent school. That's just my point of view anyway. Yeah, so that's the attraction for a lot of parents.
And so what do you think are the biggest barriers that stop people applying? Maybe we'll ask that question to both of you.
I think some of the biggest barriers that stop a lot of parents applying is, well, with the parents that I've spoken to, is that there is a lack of transparency as to whether the school offers support and how that support looks like. For example, I might have students in certain boarding schools. The school have supported them to get into the school, but they can't go on school trips. And I think that those are the barriers. They just feel like it's not for them. On the website, it doesn't look diverse, and so they don't feel like their children could fit in. And so even sometimes the language that the school tends to use is very alien for some parents, and they just don't understand. They're using colloquialisms that if you're not in the education sector, or if you're not in the independent sector, you would not understand that. And so a lot of parents are coming into the school at 11 plus as first-time buyers. They've never been in the independent sector. And so they're speaking, you've got the school speaking to them as if they understand some of the terms that they're using, and they don't. Sorry, I don't want to talk too long, but yeah.
I mean, I really agree with that, and I think I'd echo everything you've said there about jargon and representation. I think other things that put people off are, the fees. And unless it's clear, unless people understand that actually they could come there on a free place and have their uniform and their trips paid for and their music lessons, then that is very off-putting. I also think sometimes people can be intimidated by entrance exams and assume that people who've been privately educated in prep schools will always win, and they can't possibly compete with them. So we do a lot of work with a program called Bright Sparks to try and encourage people to understand that actually, if you're doing well in year 5 and year 6 in your school, you'll be fine, and you should sit our exam, and you may well be able to come to us for free.
Sorry, Guy, can I just say something about, he said about exams, and I was speaking to somebody earlier who spoke about the ISEB testing that a lot of schools, and they're kind of biased questions, because some of the questions are cultural questions that certain cultures will not understand what that question even means. So I love the idea of you saying to parents that in year 5 and year 6, if you're doing fine in your school, you'll be okay, because that message needs to be really clear for a lot of parents.
You don't do ISEB, do you?
No. Funnily enough, when I started, we did Maths, English, VR and MVR. The strong feedback we got from primary heads was the VR and MVR exams were putting people off because you had to be able to afford tutoring to be in a position to do them, because you didn't do them at primary school. And actually, when we analysed how effective they were about predicting people who were going to do well with us, they were very poor predictors. So we said, well, look, actually, why not just do normal maths and normal English? Everyone does maths and English. Get rid of the extra exams. That means 10 and 11-year-olds don't need to sit as many exams. It's cheaper for us, and it means that it's a more level playing field for people from... I mean, we have about 50% of our candidates come from primary schools. So, we've got a very mixed intake. 50% primary schools, 50% prep, about 77 different feeder schools. And actually, currently, about a third of the people who apply to us are applying for bursaries.
Of course, David's school is a bit of an outrider in that lots and lots of schools still do use these tests. So if the schools that you're applying to do, the fact that David's school doesn't really help you very much. But it is very interesting to recognise that the tests themselves can be a barrier, and that you need to work around that barrier and be thinking about how you're going to deal with it.
Yeah. Or just apply to my school.
Yeah, they've got loads of places, it's fine. But on a sort of more serious note, I mean, there are lots of different kinds of barriers that children face. And one of the things, problems they face is their parents. So you don't choose the parents you've got, and obviously your children have got great, motivated, interested parents who are all here today. What happens if you haven't got parents like that?
Well, you speak to somebody like me, so I can motivate parents, because a lot of times some of these parents, maybe they just want the best for their children. I think every parent, we can say that they want the best for their children, but finding the right route to get the best for your child, that is the challenge. So, and I talk about, I love this show, right? But I look around at certain parents who I say they've come on a shopping trip. They just come, they collect information. Well, they collect marketing material and they give their names, but they don't actually go away with information that can educate them to be able to find the right route and the best outcome for their child.
Okay, so that's I think a really interesting topic to dive into a bit, which is how do you make use of the show? Like, what should you be doing? What do you reckon, David?
Do you mean
as a parent?
As a parent,
yeah.
Well, I think it's helpful to meet people face to face and be able to ask questions, because you're right about glossy marketing materials. And actually, I think it's really helpful to be able to speak to people face to face, demystify the process, ask the questions that you want to ask, and of course you've got everyone in one place, so it's quite efficient in that sense. I mean, we find, to your point about parents, that the primary school class teacher can be an absolutely pivotal person. And sometimes there are parents who never thought of applying to us. It was because the year 5 teacher said, we know the school, we work with them on partnership activities, you really ought to think about applying there. So actually sometimes it's the child's class teacher who's the absolute key person who sets that kind of process in motion.
Yeah, I think that's also the other thing also that a lot of parents don't know, that extracurricular activities can make such a difference in the child that they're presenting, that you don't just have to be brilliant at maths and English. You might be an amazing athlete, or you might be an amazing musician, and parents don't see that. I mean, my children play 7 instruments between them, all at distinction level, and that is what helped them when they were applying. Not that they were not good at the exams, but that added an edge to them, made them different.
And I think the other thing I would reassure people is sometimes people, because you're right about language again, and words like scholarship and bursary kind of get mixed up and confused, for sure. And, when we're talking about means-tested bursaries, we're not saying you have to be the best of the best to qualify for those. They're not scholarships. You just have to be somebody who would be brilliant at our school but can't afford to come. So that's how do you get a bursary for us? Actually, the criterion is being somebody who would be brilliant but can't afford the fees. You don't have to be a scholarship level genius. That's not what it's about.
I think
sorry, and also if you're sitting here thinking, like I would be with thinking about my own children, well, my children wouldn't pass grade 1, much less distinction at multiple levels of musicians, and would certainly not get into David's school either. That doesn't mean that there aren't schools here that A, would be perfect for your children, because there are an enormous spectrum of types of schools here, from special needs focused schools all the way through the whole academic spectrum, and all of those schools want to be more diverse. So it's not just the case that you get some winning ticket if you happen to be from the right background and you're academically brilliant and you qualify for a bursary. There are plenty of opportunities for all children.
I think that's true. And actually, if you look at independent schools nationally, it's an incredibly broad church. There are big schools and small schools, single-sex schools, co-ed schools, very highly academically selective schools. Lots of schools that aren't academically selective at all. I mean, the average size of an independent school, according to the ISC census, is about 230 pupils. We're at 1,400, so in that sense, we're an outlier too. So it is a very broad and diverse sector, and hopefully, there is the right school out there for you.
But, and it's quite an important but, which I think Elaine has talked to me quite a lot about before in the past, not all schools are brilliant at understanding children's needs. So do you want to give us some examples of moments where there are difficulty? I mean, you talked about barbers in boarding schools.
I think what's really important is once the child is in the school, there needs to be a level of support and understanding. So, for example, if your child goes to a boarding school in the middle of England, how are they going to cut their hair? Even, I don't suffer with that, but I just make sure that I have a system that works. But a lot of parents say, well, my child comes home and maybe they haven't creamed their body because the school doesn't know that the matron has to tell the child that they need to cream their skin. Simple things like that can be really off-putting. And obviously, you're a day school, so obviously they're going to go home to their family every day. But in a boarding school setting, these are some of the challenges that they have. And also, one of the other challenges that I've spoken to you about is like county lines. Mm-hmm. So the journey of going back home is very different from another child of a different skin colour. So, for example, there might be a parent who will pay for a cab to take their child all the way from school back home because there's a county lines issue and they don't want their child to get lost in that. But that's a different conversation. But these are some of the challenges.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really important conversation. I mean, I had this with my son's my son plays in a football team just behind King's Cross, and talking to the black parents on the team, like none of them would let their child walk to the matches because it went down Caledonian Road, and their children always got hassled, and the white kids didn't. And schools don't necessarily understand that, and you need to find out if they do. You know, there are definitely different experiences that people have.
I think there are different experiences, whatever race you are, or whatever class or culture you come from. And the whole purpose of a school is a community, and everybody in the community has to feel like they're part of it. And so I think that there needs to be a lot of learning in schools to understand that, yes, we've got an amazing child, and every child is amazing in the school, but how can we support that child so that the whole educational experience is something that a child goes on to, pass on to their children. There should be a process of, a child has gone to your school, they've grown up, they've got married. I had an amazing experience there. My child has to go to this school. And I think that needs to grow. I think that a lot of schools have not learnt to go with the times. They've stayed in a particular era and said, this is our school, this is the way we do things, and we're not going to change. Well, I think that COVID showed us that schools have to change. And so that's the only way that there's going to be diversity in schools, whether you're in London, whether you're in, a countryside school. There needs to be, and you said something about the governors, and I think that the governors also have to be representative of the students in the school as well. I'm just saying that. I'm putting myself out there for a governorship, but,
I think that's so true, though, because you can't be what you can't see.
Right.
And actually, in addition, to trying to make sure that our student body is diverse and representative, we're working very hard on our staff body, and we're setting up a program of teaching scholarships this year, actually, so that every year we will recruit 2 teachers from underrepresented backgrounds, ideally black, and give them a job. They'll stay with us, and then over time that will build up, ideally in maths and STEM subjects. So that's teaching scholarship that we've set up this year. Over time should be really useful, because there's a serious underrepresentation of particularly black maths and science graduates in independent schools.
I mean, it really is true that Black Lives Matter put huge ripples through British education, didn't it? And lots of, at all levels, from university down to primary schools and nurseries, people were aware of the issue suddenly.
But it's really interesting, because traditionally independent schools used to pride themselves, for example, on recruiting a lot of their teachers from Oxford or Cambridge. But Oxford and Cambridge's diversity stats are some of the worst of UK universities. They're not the kind of universities you necessarily want to be recruiting from if you want to ensure that you've got a properly diverse teaching staff. You need to broaden your horizons.
So we've talked a bit about what the schools are doing to make things work better. What tips would you give parents in the audience who are thinking of applying? Like, in terms of, Elaine particularly, you specialise in this. How do you help families?
One of the things, I always tell families to be completely honest, because families think that sometimes if I don't tell the school everything, then I'm going to get the maximum support from them. But if you tell the school everything, then they're able to look at where they can support you. And that's really, really important, because, and have a good relationship with the school. I think that's really important as well. Go in when you're not understanding something, maybe there's a particular jargon that they're using that's foreign to you. Go in and talk about it. There's nothing wrong with it. I'll come with you. I don't mind speaking with you. But it's really important. And I think that's where parents think, that's why an event like this is really good. And I like what you said earlier, that parents think that they can't ask those questions. If a teacher says that your child is slow in maths or is not doing well, why haven't they done well? What are the interventions? What's the plan? How are we moving forward? How are we going to get you have to be able to, because the school has to be accountable. You can't just have your child in the school and they're not doing well. We need to find out what the general problem. I always say that it's like a triangle. There's the parents, the child, and the school. Everybody has got their role to play, and it's really, really important. So I think my advice is just be completely transparent when you're going for this, and just be honest. Just be honest, yeah.
Okay, so we've rattled through questions we think you want answers, but I'm going to throw it open to the floor now. you've got a great panel here, so do ask any questions at all that you think would be helpful.
Can I ask, do you think it's necessary for children to go to private school at primary level? Do you think that would, help their chances to get in at secondary level?
I mean, certainly from our perspective, it's not necessary, and we don't see that children from primary schools perform any less well in our entrance exams. Elaine, I don't know what your perspective is.
Your school's very different, though.
Yeah, very.
I have to applaud your school. Your school is very different. But in the grand scale of things, when you're dealing with underrepresented communities, you have a better chance if you've gone to an independent primary school. And it's a shame, but that is the reality of a lot of the parents that I deal with. Let me put it two ways. You might not be able to afford at the primary school level, and so there are other ways to be able to support your child. I'm not saying you need to do a Kumon or whatever, but there are other ways to support your child. But if you are going to go in there, you need to understand what the plan is. I always talk about this. What's the end goal school? If it's Latymer, okay. So what are the schools that they work with that I can get my child into? It's better to have that kind of plan than saying, I'm just going to put my child in a private school. It could be the wrong school. You might have a boarding school that you want your child to go to, but they don't deal with that school as a feeder school. So you need to look at what the end goal is. I think that helps you make the right decisions. I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Hello. I think it's a question. David, you mentioned something about whether scholarships or bursary, that the children don't have to be, the best in class. So how long does that, I would say, marked interest or distinction within that field have to be sustained? So do you, after every year, just check if the child is still participating at a certain level?
So if it's a scholarship, this will be true for all schools. So this is just a Latymer thing. I mean, we don't offer very many scholarships actually, but schools that do offer scholarships, and we've got a couple, then yes, you have to have sustained participation. So if you're a music scholar, then we expect you to be performing in concerts. And if you give up your instrument, then you're going to lose the scholarship. The good news is, for us, scholarships aren't worth very much money. The thing that's worth a lot of money is a bursary. You could have a free place. We're never going to take that away from you. The only thing that might change is if your financial circumstances change. So if you win the lottery, then when we do the annual review of your financial circumstances, we're probably not going to continue to give you a bursary. But if you're in our school with a bursary, we're not going to be breathing down your neck about, justifying your place, because we don't do that with any other student, so why would we pick on you?
I think that's a really good point, because a lot of parents think that when they're on the bursary, the whole school knows that their child is on a bursary. It is very confidential. Nobody knows. Your child is no different from anybody else that's there, and I think that's really important as well.
So my question is, if you are able to afford to send your child to prep school, the sacrifices that you're making as a parent to afford prep school, but you know that when we get to the senior school level, that's kind of beyond your affordability. You're not at the stage where you can afford, you meet the criteria for a bursary, but like you said, scholarships are so minimal. What are you offering for that kind of middle income family where you're not so poor that you're affording a bursary, sorry, for lack of a better word, but you're not at the stage where you can afford to send 2 kids to senior school?
Sure. So, I mean, this what sometimes is called sort of the squeezed middle argument. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that not all scholarships are free places. And, if you think about how eye-watering the expensive independent school fees are, there are plenty of people who can't afford that. That doesn't mean that they're poor. It just means they can't afford fees at that level. So actually, we offer partial bursaries. Yeah. They don't all have to be free places. You can get 50% or 25%, whatever you need to be in a position to afford the fees. And there are lots of other schools, again, this isn't just a Latymer thing, there are lots of schools that offer partial awards. So again, the qualification for a bursary is not being able to afford the fees. And then the next question is, how much of a bursary do you need?
Yeah, and a shameless plug, David will be talking at 1:15 in the Bursary and Scholarships Pavilion on precisely what Latymer offers. And all day long we've got schools talking 15-minute briefings on their offer. So definitely check that out.
Can I just say also, sometimes parents write themselves off from bursary places because of that just same statement that you made. You know, we're in the middle income. Listen, if you don't ask, you don't get. Simple. If you don't ask, you don't get. You're not, as long as you're not hiding a private yacht in the south of France, you know, if legitimately, and that's why I said be honest from the beginning. Look, we've got 3 children. We're trying to do this, but we want them to have. The school will speak to you and say, okay, what are your expectations? You know, and just be realistic. If it's 20% that the school can help you with, 30%. They will, honestly.
And just to flag up also, another shameless plug, there is an insanely useful talk at 1:30 in the Good Schools Guide forum where they're talking about the actual process of assessment for bursaries, and they've got the CEO of one of the companies that is subcontracted by schools to suss people out and work out whether they've got, how much money they've got. So you can hear what you'll be put through if you apply for a bursary, and just understand whether that's something you want to do or not. Because you know it's quite an intrusive process, and you may or may not decide that that's right for you. So 1:30, you can hear how the kind of assessments that a lot of schools use. Maybe not David's school. You can talk to him about that at his talk at 1:15. We have run out of time, and I know there's a question at the back there. I'm really sorry about that. These are really tight parent briefings, but all the speakers, well, both speakers are around. David's going down to scholarships and bursaries. Elaine's here all day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.